Welcome to our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We're going to be exploring a fascinating figure, Benjamin Peirce. Now, you might not immediately recognize the name, even if you're into philosophy.
Right.
He was mainly a mathematician, but
Yeah.
with a twist, Peirce had these philosophical and even theological ideas kind of woven into how he understood math.
Yeah.
So we're going to be using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on Peirce to guide our exploration.
It's a great choice. Peirce was kind of an anomaly, especially in 19th century America.
Yeah.
His work really pushed the boundaries of math and challenged how people thought about it.
Absolutely. And the Stanford Encyclopedia starts with this quote from Peirce. Mathematics is the science that draws necessary conclusions. That word necessary,
Yeah.
it just makes you want to explore it more deeply, especially from a philosophical perspective.
It really is at the core of his philosophy of mathematics. Peirce might have been influenced by the idea of separating what they called the form of algebra from its matter, meaning that the structure of math itself would lead to these inevitable conclusions, regardless of what you were applying those conclusions to. It's so fascinating. It almost sounds like he's implying that math exists completely independently of human thought, like Plato's forms.
Yeah, you're right on with that connection.
Yeah.
Peirce did see a strong link between math and a higher order. In fact, he saw math as a way to understand God's work, a kind of divine blueprint of the universe.
Math as a way to understand God. That's not what you usually hear in a math class.
Right.
Makes you wonder where he drew the line between these different ways of thinking.
Well, it gets even more interesting. The Stanford Encyclopedia mentions that he brought up perpetual motion in his mechanics textbook.
Really?
Yeah, he actually used it to challenge the idea of a first cause that's superior to matter.
Wow. A theological debate about perpetual motion in a math textbook.
Right.
It really shows how he blended different areas of thought. So tell me more about this. What do we know about what Peirce actually believed?
Well, it's worth mentioning that Peirce gave a series of lectures called the Lowell Lectures on ideality in the physical sciences.
And in these lectures, he talked about things like cosmology and cosmogony. But through this lens of idealism that he found in mathematics, kind of a unique perspective.
It definitely is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not how most people think of math. But let's talk about the actual mathematical work that Peirce did.
Sure.
He's known for his groundbreaking work on linear associative algebras.
Right.
Now, I have to admit, that sounds a bit intimidating.
It can sound that way. But think about it this way. In regular algebra, we're working with numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what if instead of just numbers, you could work with different kinds of objects? Objects that have their own unique rules for how they combine and interact with each other. That's basically what linear associative algebras are, systems where those objects aren't just numbers.
So it's like expanding the language of math beyond just numbers.
Yeah.
Almost like creating new universes with their own sets of rules.
It's a great way to put it. A classic example is quaternions. Those were discovered by William Rowan Hamilton, but Peirce was a huge proponent of them. They're kind of like complex numbers, but with 4 components instead of 2. And what's really cool is that they're used in things like 3D animation and video games to represent rotations in space.
So they're not just theoretical, they have real-world applications.
Exactly.
That's pretty awesome. But what about Peirce's work? Did he just sort of play around with these different algebras? Or did he actually contribute something significant?
Peirce's work was really important. He helped mathematicians see that there's this whole diversity of algebras out there. It opened up a whole new world of possibilities. He was a pioneer in this area of math.
Yeah.
And what's even more interesting is how his work was initially shared.
Oh, yeah. The Stanford Encyclopedia mentioned something about a lithograph.
Right.
That's not your typical way to publish a major mathematical work.
Definitely not. It's a fascinating story. Peirce presented his work to the National Academy of Sciences, but they couldn't afford to actually print his massive manuscript.
So what do they do?
Well, the Coast Survey, where Peirce also worked, they found a woman who had impeccable handwriting, even though she wasn't a mathematician. And she meticulously copied his entire manuscript onto lithograph stones.
A hand-drawn lithograph for a major mathematical work. That's incredible.
It really is.
It makes you wonder if any modern mathematicians would be willing to go to those lengths to share their research.
It really highlights the significance of Peirce's work and how determined they were to get it out there. Now, here's where the philosophical side of Peirce comes back in. Remember how we talked about his belief in necessary conclusions?
Yeah.
Well, he applied that to the relationship between math and logic.
Okay, so most people think of logic as the foundation of math, but it sounds like Peirce saw it the other way around.
Exactly. He believed that math could be used to analyze logic itself, rather than the other way around.
Interesting.
He saw math as this incredibly powerful tool that could unlock the secrets of how we reason.
So for Peirce, Math wasn't just about numbers and equations. It was a way to understand the very structure of thought.
That's a great way to put it.
It's almost as if he's saying that math is a meta-language, a way to analyze the grammar of logic.
Yeah, and that's what really distinguishes him from thinkers like Frege and Russell, who later championed the idea that math is built on the foundation of logic. Peirce was turning that conventional wisdom on its head.
This is amazing. We've gone from necessary conclusions to divine blueprints to hand-drawn lithographs, and now a completely different way of thinking about the relationship between math and logic. It's clear that Peirce wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. He was a true pioneer in many ways.
Yeah.
And we're just scratching the surface of his ideas. There's so much more to uncover about how his mathematical work and his philosophical views all fit together.
So Peirce's idea that math could analyze logic, it's pretty mind-blowing.
It is.
It really challenges how we usually think about the two. Was he just theorizing, or did he actually try to put this into practice?
He didn't just theorize. Peirce, along with other mathematicians like Boole and De Morgan, were pioneers in something called algebraic logic. They developed systems where you could actually represent logical statements using algebraic symbols and operations.
So instead of saying if A, then B, you could write it out as an equation.
Exactly. It's like translating the language of logic into the language of math.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if you lose something in the translation, though, like some of the nuances of philosophical arguments.
That's a great question, and it's a debate that continues to this day. But by using algebra to represent logic, Peirce and his contemporaries were able to apply mathematical tools to really study the relationships between those logical statements, derive new truths, and even create really complex logical systems.
So they were creating a whole new language for logic based on math. And this has had a lasting impact, right? It's not just a historical curiosity.
Absolutely not. Peirce's work in algebraic logic really laid the foundation for modern fields like symbolic logic and even computer science. The way we express and manipulate logical operations in computers today, it's a direct result of those early efforts to kind of translate logic into mathematical terms. It's a great example of how these abstract mathematical ideas can have really concrete and far-reaching consequences.
It's almost like Peirce was a programmer before computers even existed.
Yeah.
It makes you appreciate how these seemingly separate fields of knowledge are actually really deeply interconnected. But let's shift gears for a bit. We've been talking a lot about Peirce's ideas, but I'm curious about the man himself. What was he like as a person? The Stanford Encyclopedia hints at a strong personality.
Yeah, Peirce was definitely known for his passionate convictions and his willingness to challenge conventional thinking. He wasn't afraid of a good debate.
I bet.
But beyond his intellect, he was also a devoted father, and his influence on his son Charles Sanders Peirce is particularly interesting.
Oh yes, Charles went on to become a prominent thinker too, right?
He did.
Did he follow in his father's footsteps?
Charles definitely inherited his father's intellectual curiosity. He became a polymath, excelling in math, logic, philosophy, semiotics, even linguistics. He's often considered one of the founders of pragmatism.
Oh, wow.
An American philosophical movement that emphasizes the practical consequences of ideas. So while they definitely shared intellectual interests, Charles really forged his own unique path.
It's fascinating how those intellectual legacies can unfold within families. Did they ever collaborate on any projects?
Yeah.
I can only imagine the conversations at the dinner table.
There is some evidence that they collaborated, and it's clear that their ideas influenced each other. But Charles also developed his own distinct philosophical perspective, and they didn't always agree.
I bet those debates were something else.
It must have been fascinating.
It's too bad we don't have recordings of them.
Yeah.
So Benjamin Peirce wasn't just a groundbreaking mathematician and philosopher. He was also the father of another remarkable thinker. It seems his legacy is pretty multi-layered.
It is. His influence continues to resonate today. Peirce's work reminds us that true innovation often comes from questioning those assumptions and being willing to explore unconventional ideas. His boldness is really inspiring, especially in a world that often favors conformity.
It makes you think about the importance of nurturing that intellectual curiosity,
Absolutely.
both in ourselves and in future generations.
Exactly. And Peirce also demonstrates the power of interdisciplinary thinking. He didn't see these rigid boundaries between math, philosophy, and theology. He saw them as interconnected realms of knowledge, each one shedding light on the others.
It's a good reminder that knowledge is a web, not a series of isolated compartments. We can learn so much by breaking down those artificial barriers between disciplines.
Right. It's like Peirce was saying, don't just be a mathematician or a philosopher, be a thinker.
I love that. And at the heart of it all is the power of a good question. Peirce's pursuit of answers led him to some truly groundbreaking discoveries. And his work continues to spark new questions and avenues of inquiry even today. It makes you wonder what questions he'd be asking if you were alive today.
Maybe he'd be exploring the philosophical implications of artificial intelligence or the nature of consciousness in a digital age. Who knows?
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure, his inquisitive spirit would be right at home in the complexities of the 21st century.
As we're wrapping up our deep dive into Benjamin Peirce, I keep coming back to that quote, mathematics is the science that draws necessary conclusions. It just seems so central to how he thought about math.
It really is. Peirce was saying something really profound about the nature of math and its ability to reveal these truths about the universe, and even about how we think that word necessary. It implies that these truths are inescapable, inherent.
Yeah, and the fact that he uses the word draws, it emphasizes that there's an active role for the mathematician. It's not just passively observing.
Yeah.
It's about engaging and using mathematical reasoning.
Exactly. For Peirce, math was this dynamic process of exploration and discovery. It was about bringing those necessary conclusions to light, not just looking at math as a bunch of static rules.
Right. It makes you wonder about those truths then. Are they already out there just waiting to be discovered? Or are they created through that mathematical inquiry, that act of doing math?
It's the question that's puzzled philosophers of math forever. Are we discovering truths that are already part of reality, or are we creating them through logic and reasoning? It's still debated today.
It's like asking, is math a map of a place that already exists, or is it a blueprint that we're using to create that place as we go? Peirce's belief in the divine nature of math. It kind of leans towards that idea of pre-existing truths, but even if you take the theology out of it, his work still makes you think about where mathematical truths come from.
Absolutely. Whether you see math as some divine language or a human construct, Peirce's work makes you think about the implications of our mathematical discoveries. Are they just products of our logical systems, or are they reflections of something much deeper, something beyond the human mind?
It's a question that connects Peirce's time to our own. It's still relevant today, as we're pushing the boundaries of math and exploring these new areas, like AI and theoretical physics.
And it's a question we want you to think about, too. Benjamin Peirce's legacy shows us that math is so much more than just equations. It's a tool for understanding the universe, the nature of thought, and maybe even truth itself. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never underestimate the power of mathematics.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Benjamin Peirce. We hope you've gained a new perspective on math and that you'll embrace the interconnectedness of knowledge. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the vast world of ideas.